He had my hair wrapped around his fist before I even understood what was happening. One second I was standing in the hallway, and the next I was airborne, dragged down a flight of stairs by a man who benched 350 pounds on a Tuesday morning and called it warm-up. The basement door closed behind me, the lock clicked, and the dark that swallowed me whole wasn't the worst thing in that house. He was. My name doesn't matter. What matters is that I dated Lawrence Phillips, first-round NFL draft pick, star running back, the kind of athlete whose highlight reel made stadiums vibrate. When we first got together, I genuinely believed the attentiveness was love. He insisted on driving me everywhere. He rearranged my schedule so our time aligned perfectly. I thought he was devoted. I told my mother he was the most protective man I'd ever known. She looked at me the way mothers do when they already see the ending you haven't read yet. I need you to understand what that basement felt like, because I'm going to tell you something that happened down there that I've never told anyone. And it changes what you think you know about how long this actually went on. The DUI suspension was the turning point. Football had been the pressure valve, keeping everything contained. The violence, the ego, the festering locker room aggression he carried home like dirty equipment. Without the game, he had nowhere to put any of it. He'd sit in the dark, watching his own touchdown highlights on a loop, drinking until the room tilted, and then he'd find a reason. The reasons were always small. I looked at my phone wrong. I moved through the kitchen too loudly during a broadcast. One night, he accused me of distracting him, just existing in the room while he watched himself on the television, and that was the night he dragged me down those stairs. 5 days. I was down there 5 days. He threw in hard bread through the door, the kind you break teeth on, like I was something that needed feeding but not feeding well. The cold was structural, not the kind you fix with a blanket, but the kind that lives in concrete and gets into your joints and stays. I counted the hours by the strip of light under the door. I memorized the sound of his footsteps above me and learned which pattern meant he was drunk enough to sleep and which meant he was coming down. Here is what I didn't tell the police. When I finally made my report on the 3rd day, I found the door hinges. I could have been out by day 4, but I waited until I was certain he was unconscious because I had seen what he did to people who ran before they were ready. The calculating part of him, the part that read defenses for a living, was still fully operational, even when he was drunk. I needed every advantage. The night I told him I was leaving and going to the cops, he didn't scream. He didn't even raise his voice. He just walked me backward into the wall and wrapped his hands around my throat with the same focused calm he brought to practice drills. My vision went dark at the edges, then darker, then completely. When I came back, he was asleep on the couch. I walked out barefoot and ran until the burning in my lungs was louder than everything else. The league had known. Teams had known. His talent insulated him through suspension after suspension, report after report. Lawrence Phillips eventually went to prison. He died there by his own hand after being accused of killing his cellmate. The terror he built inside me didn't die with him. It dictates the locks I buy. It dictates the seats I choose in restaurants. It dictates the way I sleep, facing the door, one shoe already on. You don't walk out of that basement and go back to who you were before the lock clicked. That version of me is still down there in the dark, listening to footsteps above the ceiling. And sometimes, late at night, I still count them. Lawrence Phillips terrorized behind closed doors. But the next story proves the field itself can be the hunting ground, when the ref blowing the whistle becomes the prey. The first time Aaron Hernandez told me where I lived, we were standing 15 yards apart in front of 40,000 people. He said it quietly, like he was calling a route. Like it was just another play, in a playbook he'd already memorized. Nobody in those stands heard a word. I heard every syllable. My name is Carlos. I've worked as a football referee for 11 years, and being Latino in that role means you develop a specific kind of thick skin. You learn to absorb the crowd noise, the player aggression, the front office politics, and you keep your face neutral and your flag arm clean. I was good at my job. I was precise. I had never, before that season, believed that a bad call could make me a target worth hunting. Hernandez wasn't like other aggressive players. Other players screamed. Other players got in your face and flexed and had to be pulled back by teammates. Hernandez just waited. He had this quality of perfect, predatory patience. He'd let everyone else burn their heat, and then when the field cleared and the cameras swung away, he'd lean in and say exactly what he wanted you to hear. The harassment began in October of that year. and I want you to pay close attention to how it escalated, because there was a specific shape to it, a deliberate progression that I only understood in retrospect. Cars first. After Friday night games, a car I didn't recognize would idle outside my building for 30 minutes before driving away. Then the scratches on my vehicle. Driver's side, always, 4 parallel lines, like a signature. I reported it to the league front office twice. Both times I was told, in language as smooth and empty as a press release, that this sounded like the heat of the moment. Anger. That came with officiating at a professional level. They said it would pass. Then came the game, where my fellow referee Mateo ejected Aaron from the field for an illegal late hit, a hit so severe that the player on the receiving end was carted off. Mateo threw the flag cleanly, called it correctly, and walked Aaron to the sideline with the same professional composure he brought to every ejection. Aaron didn't argue. He didn't slam his helmet or curse at the line judge. He just smiled at both of us as he walked off the turf. A wide, unhurried, deeply comfortable smile. 3 days later, Mateo was dead. The police described it as a targeted attack. The details were not released publicly, but I knew some of them. The kind of details that tell you the act was designed to communicate something, not just to end a life, but to narrate one. A message built out of a human body. The box arrived on my porch on a Thursday morning. I am not going to describe what was inside it. I'll tell you only that I understood immediately what it was, and that I sat down on my front step in the November cold and did not move for a long time. The box was the message. The message was, you are next on the list, and I am not rushed. I stopped leaving my house except for games. I triple-locked the doors. I slept with the lights on and a kitchen knife on the nightstand. I became, in the space of 3 weeks, a man who had forgotten what it felt like to breathe without calculating the risk first. The parking lot ambush came on a Tuesday night in late November. 3 men. They knew my car, knew my route, knew exactly how long I stood between the field exit and my driver's door. The beating was methodical and unhurried. Between the blows, one of them told me that Aaron Hernandez did not forgive disrespect. He said it the same way you'd remind someone of a company policy. Aaron Hernandez was eventually convicted of murder and sentenced to life in prison. He died in his cell in 2017. The men who beat me were never charged. The box on my porch was never traced. The league's formal response to my situation was a 2-paragraph letter expressing concern and offering access to a counseling hotline. I still referee. People ask me why. I referee because the day I stop is the day the parking lot wins. But I want you to know, every Friday night when I walk out to that field and the stadium lights hit me, I scan the sidelines first, not for position, not for penalty formation. I scan for a smile I'll never see on anyone else's face. Hernandez hunted from inside the league. But the next story shows what happens when a man doesn't need to be a player, he just needs to worship one. The jersey came first. A number 89, Carolina Panthers, pristine white with the name Kareth across the shoulders. Galen hung it on the bedroom wall. The week he moved in, and I told myself it was just sports fan energy. The harmless obsession that makes grown men paint their faces on Sundays. I told myself that for a long time. My name is Ray. Yes, same first name as the man who eventually became the blueprint for the worst months of my life. I noticed that coincidence early and decided it meant nothing. I was wrong about a lot of things that year. Galen and I had been together for 2 years when he first started mimicking Ray Caruth's posture. The wide stance, the way Caruth held his jaw in press conference footage, the tilt of his head when he was listening. I brought it up once, gently, and Galen smiled and said he admired athletes with discipline. He said Caruth understood that a man had to protect his resources. His word, resources. I let it go. Then the real news cycle hit. What Ray Caruth had actually done, hiring a gunman to murder his pregnant girlfriend Cherika Adams to avoid paying child support, broke wide open across every sports network. I watched Galen watch the coverage, and I'm telling you that the expression on his face was not horror. It wasn't even complicated. He watched with the focused attention of a student taking notes. We were expecting a baby, 8 weeks along. And as I watched him study the courtroom footage and pull up the legal case analysis on his laptop, something cold and specific settled into my chest. Not panic, not confusion, but a horrible clarity. I knew what he was doing. He was reverse engineering the playbook. The next 2 weeks, I moved quietly. I didn't confront him. I didn't pack dramatically. I moved small amounts of what mattered to my car while he slept, and on a Thursday afternoon while he was watching more coverage of the Caruth sentencing hearing, I drove to my sister's house in Greensboro without telling him I was going and without looking at the rearview mirror until I hit the highway. He found me in 4 days. I don't know how. I've asked myself that question every day since, and I've never found an answer that settles it. But on a Monday night, I heard the front door of my sister's house come open with a crack that was too heavy and too fast to be a knock. The deadbolt failed. He came through the door with that dead-eyed, perfectly calibrated calmness that was so much worse than screaming, so much worse than rage, because it told me he had already completed the calculation. He'd already decided. He said I was going to ruin his life. He said it the way you'd state a fact about weather. And as his hand moved slowly toward the inside of his jacket, I stopped thinking and started moving. The lamp on my sister's side table was ceramic, heavy at the base, and I brought it down across his forearm with everything I had. He stumbled. I ran through the door he'd broken open, out into the street, screaming, until a neighbor's porch light came on. He was arrested that night. The weapon was recovered. He's in prison now, has been for years. But here's the thing about surviving someone who idolized a man like Ray Caruth. You spend a long time afterward trying to understand when you missed it. You replay the jersey on the wall. You replay the word resources. You replay the face he made watching those broadcasts, that quiet, studying focus, and you try to find the exact moment the obsession crossed into architecture, into planning. I still haven't found it. I've stopped looking. My daughter was born healthy. She has Galen's jaw and my eyes, and she has absolutely no idea who Ray Caruth is. I am going to keep it that way for as long as I possibly can. The final story is different. No weapon, no arrest, no explanation, just a rookie, a midnight field, and a dead man who needed one last game. This is a paranormal encounter. I have told exactly 3 people in my life, and 2 of them stopped talking to me for a while after. The third cried. I'm telling it now because I'm 41 years old and I'm tired of carrying it alone, and because I think Joe Maxfield would want it told. My name is Jim. Getting drafted into the National Football League is supposed to be the moment everything becomes real. Your name called, the hat on your head, the camera in your face, the whole country watching. For me, it was the moment everything unraveled. The roster pressure, the starting lineup uncertainty, the media scrutiny, it dismantled me in ways that training camp had not prepared me for. By the time I got benched 4 games into my rookie season, I was sleeping badly, eating worse, and terrified of my own shadow on the practice field. I begged my head coach for special permission to practice alone on the game field late at night. He granted it reluctantly, signed off on it as a mental health accommodation, and told me not to break anything. So on the night before the most important game of my rookie season, I was out on the turf at midnight, under the stadium work lights, running routes in the silence, terrified of the opposing team's defensive lineup, and trying to remind my body what it already knew how to do. That's when I realized I wasn't alone. He was standing at the far end of the field, fully geared up, helmet, shoulder pads, the complete uniform. I couldn't see his face behind the visor, but I knew the number. Everyone in the league knew that number. It belonged to Joe Maxfield, the star player and team captain of the franchise I was set to face the following morning. He was a legend in the specific way that only 15-year veterans become, the kind of player that younger guys like me had watched on tape since high school, trying to steal even 10% of what he knew. I should have been frightened. Looking back, I understand that a fully geared player standing alone on an opposing team's field at midnight is not an ordinary situation. But there was something about the way he stood, patient, undemanding, almost gentle, that made alarm feel inappropriate. He waved me over. I went. We ran drills for 2 hours. He corrected my release point on short routes. He showed me how to read a specific defensive coverage formation that I had been misidentifying all season, the one that had been burning me consistently since week 2. He told me to stop performing for the cameras and play the game that lived in my hands, not the one I thought the audience wanted to see. He said it simply, the way experienced players talk when they're not performing for anyone. We didn't exchange names. We didn't talk about anything outside the field. When we finished, he nodded once and walked toward the far tunnel. I watched him go. He didn't look back. I went to bed feeling, for the first time in months, like a football player. My teammates woke me at 7 in the morning. The game had been canceled. Joe Maxfield had died in his sleep from a cardiac event sometime around midnight. I sat with that information for a very long time before I allowed myself to do the math. The open casket viewing was 4 days later. I attended with the rest of the league. I moved through the lines slowly, the way you do at those things. Heads down, hands folded, the specific silence of a room full of large men who don't know what to do with grief. When I reached the casket and looked down at Joe Maxfield's face, his lips were curved, not dramatically, not theatrically, just the smallest tilt at the corner of his mouth. The expression of a man who has finished something he set out to do. I've thought about that midnight field almost every day since. I've thought about what it means, that he spent whatever remained of himself, not resting, not moving on, but running drills with a scared rookie on a dark field in the middle of the night. I've thought about the specific route he corrected, the specific coverage he showed me, and whether he somehow knew those were the exact problems I was going to face in a game that never happened. I still have no framework for what I experienced. I'm not sure I need one. What I know is this: Joe Maxfield was a team captain down to the very last moment of whatever he was. And if his spirit stayed behind on that gridiron, long enough to steady the hands of a struggling kid, long enough to pass something forward before the lights went out completely, then the only thing I know how to do with that is be worth what he gave. I still play his way. I always will. The archive closes tonight. Subscribe, send us your story, and click what's waiting on your screen, because the next case is already open.